Welcome back to the Legislative Analyst Office training program on mandates. In this second presentation, we look at a variety of state requirements and talk about whether or not they would be reimbursable mandates. As we discussed in the first training presentation, the idea of the state reimbursing local governments for new requirements makes intuitive sense, but sorting out which state requirements must be reimbursed can be tricky. In part, this is because the section of the state constitution that promises mandate reimbursements is not very detailed, and because state and local relations can be complex. This second training presentation explores different types of state laws and regulations and helps you walk through the steps to sort out whether or not they would impose a reimbursable mandate. For illustration purposes, most of the state requirements we discuss are hypothetical examples, with some sounding a bit like they came out of a book of cartoons. Before we get started, we'd like to encourage anyone who hasn't viewed our first mandate presentation to do so now. You'll find that the second training program builds on the information discussed in the earlier presentation. Spiked orange hair. Proposition 10,009 criminalizes the wearing of spiked orange hair, 1 year in jail for the first infraction, 20 years for subsequent infractions. Cities and counties must enforce this law. Is this a reimbursable mandate? Well, let's look at a slide that summarizes the key information from the first training presentation. This first time, though, let's go this full slide, step by step, starting with the two threshold criteria for a reimbursable mandate. First, was Proposition 10,009 freely imposed by state government? Well, no, it was imposed by the voters, so we can't check this criterion as being met. How about the second criterion? Does it require local agencies to pay for a new governmental program, or a higher level of service, or a share of cost? Yes, this is clear that there'd be new local government activities, arresting people with spiked orange hair, keeping them in jail, so we can check this one. Next, let's look at the exemptions. Remember, if any one of these exemptions applies, then the measure is not a reimbursable mandate. Was the measure created before 1975? No. So let's eliminate this exemption from the list. Was it enacted upon local request? No, so this exemption doesn't apply. Does it define a crime or a penalty? Well, yes, so let's keep this exemption on the screen. Is it voluntary? No, it's not, and so we can eliminate this next exemption from the screen. Is it possible to pay for with fees, related savings, or designated state funds? No, let's eliminate this exemption. Was it imposed on a type of agency that never levied a property tax? No, cities and counties have long levied a property tax, so we can eliminate this exemption. Was it established by state government to implement a voter-approved or federal requirement? No. Well, now let's step back and look. Proposition 10,009 does not meet one of the threshold criterion for a mandate. It wasn't freely imposed by the legislature, governor, or a state agency. It was imposed by the voters. Proposition 10,009 also is exempt from the mandate requirement because it defines a crime or a penalty. So the answer is no, this measure is not a reimbursable mandate because voter-approved measures are not requirements freely imposed by the state, and because measures that define a crime or set a penalty are not reimbursable mandates. Okay, that one was about as easy as you'll find. Let's try a variation on the theme. Suppose the legislature later enacts a law requiring counties to provide counseling to people who are released from jail after their spiked hair infraction. Proposition 10,009 doesn't call for counseling or any type of after-jail release program, but there is some thought that counseling might reduce recidivism. Would this be a state reimbursable mandate, and if so, what cost would be reimbursable? Let's return to our summary slide. Well, the requirement was freely imposed by state government, so let's check the first threshold criteria. It also clearly requires counties to provide a new governmental program, counseling people released from the jail. It doesn't really meet any of the exemptions, though. It was enacted after 1975. Local agencies didn't request the requirement. While the measure has something to do with criminal activity, the measure doesn't define a crime or set a penalty. Nothing about the requirement is voluntary or imposed on a program local agencies chose to create. The program isn't possible to pay for through fees, and though there's some thought that recidivism might be reduced, there are no clear offsetting savings identified for cities and counties. Counties are a type of agency that levied a property tax, and the counseling program really couldn't be interpreted as implementing Proposition 10,009. So yes, it would be a reimbursable mandate. It meets both of the threshold criteria, and none of the exemptions apply. In this case, all 58 counties would be eligible for being reimbursed for the reasonable cost associated with operating the counseling program. Graffiti programs. Most cities have programs to discourage graffiti. Let's say a new state law requires all cities that had these programs in a certain year to continue to operate them with funding increases to account for inflation. Is this a reimbursable mandate? Well, okay, the requirement was freely imposed by state government upon local agencies, so we can check the first criterion. Does it make local agencies pay for a new governmental program or a higher level of service? Well, in this example, continuing a city graffiti program used to be optional, but now local agencies have no choice but to operate a graffiti program. The city couldn't eliminate the program during times of fiscal difficulty or to fund a more valuable program, so the law does create a new required program. Thus, the second criterion gets a check. Let's look at the exemptions. Did the legislature enact the law before 1975? No. At the request of local agencies? No. The measure doesn't define a crime. It's not voluntary. It's not possible to pay for it through fees, and there's no information about state revenues being designated to pay for it or offsetting savings paying for the program's cost. It was imposed on cities, a local government that has long imposed a property tax. And finally, the measure was not established to implement a voter or federal requirement. In short, the policy would meet both of the threshold criteria and wouldn't meet any of the factors listed as an exemption. So the cost of operating a graffiti program would be a reimbursable mandate. What would be the cost of the mandate, the full cost of the program, or just the increased cost to pay for inflation? In this example, the state reimbursable cost would be all program cost. The base program that the local agency could no longer eliminate, and the inflation adjustment. In short, even though a city may currently choose to operate a program, if the program becomes mandatory, the state would be required to fully reimburse cities for all program cost.